to the Rural Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Larson. Today we're with David Hernandez and Tereasa Surratt of Camp Wandawega in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, a camp with a very storied past and an almost unbelievable history that includes the mob, a madam, and the Vatican. David and Tereasa have transformed the property from a dilapidated campsite into what has now been listed as one of the top 100 hotels in the world. Throughout this adventure, they have found themselves right ahead of the latest trends, or maybe even setting them, making the camp a creative playground and landing them in the center of some epic brand collaborations and product lines. And a little side note, as you know, we typically do all our interviews in person, but due to a number of factors, we were not able to record this one in person. So while we had to compromise a little bit on the audio, the content is so good that I really don't think you'll mind. So here we go with David and Tereasa. All right, well, we're here today with David Hernandez and Tereasa Surratt from Camp Wandawega in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Guys, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
Well, let's start from the beginning and have us tell you a little bit about your backgrounds and how you grew up.
You want to start, Tereasa? Ladies first.
Would you like the 1 hour version or the 30-second version? I'll start with the sort of the 1 minute version. I grew up in a little farm town in southern Illinois. It's called Beardstown, like the beard with a B. And it had 4,000 people, but I grew up about 8 miles outside of town, and between soybeans and corn and a hog lot. And so went to college when I was 17, actually, and wanted to be a graphic designer. I just wanted to do creative things. After spending my whole sort of childhood and high school years painting, grocery store windows and bug shields and everything you do in a small town if you're an artist to make money, went to school at SIU and then studied graphic design and then moved to Chicago after a couple false starts and strange jobs. And then from Chicago, went straight into advertising. And then advertising is where I feel like I learned from so many people who'd been doing it for so long, how to really build a brand and tell a story. And that's where I met David. And so David and I have actually worked together for, oh my Lord, David, 15 years, right?
Yeah, probably longer, on and off. I mean, obviously, through Camp Wandawega, we worked together on the side, obviously, but we worked together on and off during our day jobs as well.
So yeah, we've been here together at camp, obviously working as partners in marriage and partners in being parents. And then at the agency life, it's actually good sometimes because we can commute in together. So I skipped through about 45 years there, but that's a nutshell.
I was kind of the opposite of Tereasa. So she was like a total country kid. I was a total city kid. I grew up in the city of Chicago on the north side in Albany Park and Ravenswood, that neck of the woods. And so for me, though, Camp Wandawega was kind of a weekend getaway. It was a place that I've been going to, my whole life when it was owned by the Catholic Church. So it was kind of a great little way to escape the city and kind of be able to run around in the woods and, go swimming in the lake and fishing and do all the amazing things that you could do out in the country. And I mean, for me, it's like sometimes I literally think of, Wisconsin as a lifesaver in terms of getting out of the city, as opposed to all the stupid stuff I would have done if I stayed in Chicago as a kid. So.
Definitely. So did you have any idea that maybe this would be a bigger part of your future and have any dreams of owning that someday? Or was that just a completely separate thing?
I think, I don't think it's the sort of thing when you're a little kid that you could ever even comprehend that you could own something, especially something like this, something that meant so much to me and meant so much to so many people. It's like the sort of thing that you don't really think about anyone ever owning because it's owned so collectively. So it wasn't even something that we really fantasized about. I mean, I do think maybe we thought about like maybe we can build a whole bunch of cabins and me and all my childhood friends, my cousins who all used to come here, we could all have our own little cabin or whatever. But I think those dreams kind of faded away as we kind of grew up and went our separate ways. But ultimately, Tereasa and I started visiting the camp when it was still owned by the Catholic Church in the early 2000s. And Father Baginskis, who was the main caretaker still, I told him, hey, if you're ever going to sell the place, let me know before you do. And a couple of years later, 2003, he called. He said, "Okay, if you're serious, it's time." And we bought it in around January of 2004. And again, it's funny though, we're talking about like dreaming about owning it. We still kind of, we're humbled by the fact that we are just like one tiny little chapter in the history of the place. And we know that, you know, we're not really the owners. We're just the current stewards or the current caretakers. So we're just trying to do our job of, you know, making the most of it so that future generations can enjoy it like we do.
I love that. Talk a little bit about the past, because it does have a very storied past.
Yeah, the past of the place is really amazing. It's funny, too, getting back to my childhood. When we were little kids here, hanging out when it was run by the Catholic Church, we had all these childhood fantasies that we had made up about Al Capone and secret passageways and trying to find Capone's money and all kinds of silly little stories. And I don't think, you know, again, that was really just kind of our childhood imaginations running wild. And it never, ever occurred to us that the real history could be so much more adventurous and romantic and seedy than what we had made up. So it turns out that the place, you know, around 1925 when it started, it was basically, you know, probably bought by the mob and run by the madam. And she ran it as kind of a lodge, hotel, speakeasy, brothel, all rolled into one. You know, so I think if you could imagine this place, you know, opening up in the midst of Prohibition, it was an amazing little place to be on the end of a dead-end road, on the edge of a lake that no one had ever heard of, on the edge of the woods. It was a perfect little getaway. And if you were to draw a triangle from Chicago to Milwaukee to Madison, it's right in that triangle. So it's, you know, relatively close to three major markets. So it was kind of an amazing little getaway during the Prohibition era. And then I think when the stock market crashed in 1929, I think they had legitimate plans for it to be more of like a proper, you know, saloon, hotel, restaurant, whatever. But I think with the economy going south at that point, everything changed. And I think that's when they really kind of leaned into becoming a brothel. You had all these first generation women who had come from Europe who found themselves in America looking for great opportunities, better opportunities, jobs, etc. And they found themselves here in the midst of the Great Depression. And unfortunately, sadly, you know, many of them had to turn to prostitution as a mode of survival. So anyway, the madam ran the place. Even after Prohibition, she continued to sell illegal liquor and she continued to run it as a brothel. And she did that all the way until 1942 when she was finally arrested for running a bawdy house of ill fame. But before that, there was a whole series of things from criminals on the run, contempt of court, multiple federal raids, Prohibition padlocks, kidnapping, murder, suicide, etc. So there's like a really kind of interesting history from the beginning until 1942. And then it became a legitimate lake resort in the 1950s. And then the Catholic Church bought it around 1961, and they owned it until about 2004 when we bought it. So, you know, kind of like from the mob to the madam to a legitimate lake resort to being, you know, purchased by the Vatican to be a getaway for Latvian priests who had fled Latvia during the war, and they couldn't go back because it was part of the Soviet Union. So that was how I came to know the place. It's because my mom is Latvian Catholic. She's a refugee. And this was a place where the Latvian side of my family could kind of come together outside of the city and, you know, sing Latvian folk songs and drink Latvian liqueur and, you know, dance and sing around the bonfire. So it was kind of like a way for them to return home, even though they couldn't return home because of the Soviet Union.
Wow, that's incredible. So describe the camp for us. What was it like when you took it over? What kind of shape was it in?
That's one of my favorite questions. It was, we kind of describe it as Blair Witch. I remember when David first took me here, and it was, oh my Lord, we'd only been dating for maybe a year, and we'd trailer and motorcycles up here. And we just wanted to sort of ride the Wisconsin countryside. And he'd been talking for all these years really fondly about this place that he went to his whole childhood. And, you know, we were in our 20s, and he brought me up here, and I had this idyllic vision in my head of what he'd been describing. And it was nothing like that. It really was like a hoarder's den in many rooms, like roofs falling in and windows missing and truly scary stuff. I remember the whole field was just full of broken down cars, like 25 broken down on blocks cars, and then just a mountain of used tires. it really did look like a junkyard. And the parts didn't look like a junkyard, just looked like this is where you would take someone to, I don't know, if you were going to kidnap someone, like it looked like bad things happened here. So it was really scary. And we stayed a couple times, and Father Paginskis let us rent a room. And of course we just got this room to make it habitable to spend the night. And we never, at that point, never imagined, because he didn't tell me at that stage that he was thinking about someday buying it. Or he didn't even mention at that point that he even dreamed ever as a child of buying it. And so it was pretty scary. The before pictures are something that we just started to share on Instagram here in this last year, because all these years, I was thinking, wow, if anybody really saw what this place was underneath when we got it, it would be too scary to ever come back. Or they would only be able to walk in the rooms and be like, holy God, what it was before we started to put it back together. So David, we'd been together for a while, and coming here on occasion, and not really even seeing the whole property. Then when David says, well, Father Biscuits called and he mentioned it, and I'm like, oh, cool. What are they going to do with it? And he's like, well, I was thinking about buying it. And I was like, what? Because, what do you do with the 25-acre condemned property? And it wasn't just that it was condemned. It was full of these rooms packed to the ceiling with like junk. It was such an overwhelming, terrifying money pit, like with a capital M. I couldn't take it seriously, but then he waited a week because I was just like, I'm not even going to consider this. This is nuts. And then about a week later, he brought it up again, and then he kept bringing it up very diligently. And then finally, I just, he sort of wore me down. I'm like, okay. I mean, I'd done it before. I'd bought my first sort of condemned house when I was 21 and just graduated college. So it wasn't like a new thing to tackle, but this was different because it was gigantic. And then he and I had no plan for it. We just wanted to save it. So,
and we were engaged at the time. We ended up closing on it, I think, December, January 2003, January 2004, and we got married in August of 2004. So we basically had 8 months to get the place just barely good enough to be able to have 250 of our closest friends and relatives come for our wedding. So we had a ton of work to do in the early days. And we literally were grabbing friends every single weekend from Chicago. And we promised them we'd fill them up with booze and chili if they would just come help us work all weekend. So we had like these week after week after week of work parties of just cleaning and gutting and painting and throwing things away and donating things and finding amazing things in the process that obviously were worth saving. I think that was one of the great things about it is the property in general. Teresa mentioned it was obviously really run down, but it had never truly been molested. It had never been renovated. So all the windows, all the furniture, all the doors, all the fixtures, all the sinks, everything was still original going back to the 20s, 30s, and 40s. The place was originally built in the 20s, but they had added on more cabins and more, expansions and stuff into the 30s and 40s. And it was almost as if nothing had ever been thrown away. So we had to peel away all the stuff that was, kind of piled into the place in the 80s and 90s and beyond that just didn't belong here, and save all the stuff that mattered and kind of put it all back together again, like just barely in time for our wedding.
But the truth is we locked almost all the doors. So no one stayed here. No one spent the night here, except for David and I in the one room that we had fixed up enough. And we just pitched a huge tent out in the fields, and everyone did, like any outdoor wedding, you spend your time out there. And so it was fast and nerve-wracking and exhilarating. If you can imagine planning for a wedding for 250 in the middle of nowhere, essentially, where we were. It wasn't a wedding facility. So every single thing that you need, every chair, every porta potty, everything was like throwing a party in the woods. So we did all that, but at the same time, it was compounded with a deadline that was closer to 7 months. We're working full time in Chicago. This is another state, and we're just trying to get the property, up to at least tolerable. And so I remember the morning of the wedding, it was 6:00 in the morning, and I was out there with 2 bags of mulch on my shoulders, just mulching as much as I could around these little moments. So I'm like, it's a porta potty, but it's really cute because look, it's got fresh mulch. That's it was crazy, but I think it was an interesting way to start out because it really set a precedence for a degree of commitment that we would have to have and continue at that pace for the next 15 years to where we are now to be able to get it to where it is. So even though it's not the mad rush for the wedding, we've never sort of taken our foot off the accelerator since, but just with different projects. And of course, with a property that's almost 100 years old, it's never ending, you know, and nothing's ever going to be cheap or fast or easy. So whether you need 1 year's all new roofs in the buildings, or you're running underwater plumbing another year, or replacing all the electrical in another year, it's an adventure. It's expensive, but it has been truly a labor of love, and it's been a good anecdote for what we have to do in the city in our jobs, which is really the polar opposite. So it's been great therapy for us.
That's great. I love that you were able to get married there. Did you have like a massive vision for it when you bought it, or was it just kind of like just start?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think a lot of it was just my childhood nostalgia for like wanting to save this old place that had meant so much to me as a kid, and my family and my extended family. We had no vision whatsoever of this ever becoming like a business or an event venue or a gathering place. We were kind of feeling like it was going to be more of like an extended friends and family, you know, private friends and family retreat. Like we would maybe do like a key club with a lot of our friends, anybody who wanted to be a part of it, maybe family members, just we could all kind of come and go. But after a couple years in, you know, the story of the place, you know, started kind of getting out through social media and through press, and people started coming out of the woodwork, you know, perfect strangers coming out of the woodwork and asking us if they could rent a room or rent a cabin or rent the whole place out for a wedding or whatever. And we just kept turning them away because we just weren't a business. We never wanted to be a business. We kind of felt like the minute we started taking money from people, it would kind of ruin the balance of, you know, the joy that we get from this place. And so we were very resistant to that at first. But we kept on having like these big weekend gatherings with all of our friends and big parties and things like that. And we realized like, oh my God, we can't sustain this because it's way too expensive to be putting all the work into it and then to be doing all of this entertaining. So we started kind of experimenting with like taking money on a smaller scale to do small scale events and things like that. And then ultimately, as that started to take off, we actually, it's kind of funny. The county tried. We continued to do Catholic Mass there even after we bought the place. It was kind of a handshake deal with Father Baginskis. As long as the will of the local community wanted to continue to have outdoor Mass, we would let them. And you know, to this day, they still do it from Memorial Day to Labor Day. But one day the county came by and they saw all the church pews set up outside. We do a big outdoor Mass, and they were like, well, what's this? What's going on here? And we're like, oh, it's, you know, Catholic Mass. We do Catholic Mass every Sunday. And they're like, you can't have Mass there. You guys aren't zoned for it. This is zoned residential. Like, well, we've been doing Mass here for 50 years. So, you know, it's not really a good time to tell us that. So they took us by the hand and they guided us through the process to get the necessary rezoning and permits and licenses so that we could not only continue to do Mass, but we can also start, you know, properly doing art camp and kids camp and creative retreats and start using it more like an event venue for weddings and things like that. So then we did become a business, and the business model for us has been every single penny that we make goes right back into the ongoing renovation and preservation. So it's not a money-making venture, but it's an ongoing preservation venture. So it's allowed us to kind of get further and further ahead with trying to make sure we can kind of save the place and preserve the place for another generation.
That's great. Well, at this point, you've created an experience for your guests that is unlike any other. So talk about your process, and maybe it just came together as you grew, but was there some intentionality behind creating an awesome experience?
We're pointing at each other because we both have different answers for this. I think, sorry, he and I were like, I have this side conversation when you were asking just now. You know what? I mean, like David said, it was really, honestly, completely organic. We always get asked, I think it's a common question, how did you dream this thing up? And honestly, we didn't. It was so organic. We didn't have a vision that would be like giving ourselves, I think, too much credit. It was every day and every year saying, hey, it might be fun if we did X. It could be cool if we did Z. And at the time, 15 years ago, we didn't know anyone who owned a summer camp. Summer camps were literally just places that kids went. And sometimes they would do, you know, specialty camps at, but it wasn't a thing yet. And so early on, after we bought it, when it ended up on I think the first was Country Living and Chicago Home and Garden. That quickly turned into an article with Wall Street Journal, and because it was an anomaly at the time, before the sort of trend had hit, not just summer camps by people owning them, but the summer camp theme that we started to see take over in like retail and clothing and, toys and all those things. And so what happened was we were just doing fun things that we liked, and with no strategy and no foresight, we were just like, let's try this and let's do build some teepees. Let's build a Boy Scout village. Let's build a tree house that looks like a cabin in the sky, things like that, because it was fun. And then what happens, I guess, with press is it's a virtuous cycle, because press begets press. And so the word got out. And then when word gets out, more people want to come. And then that sort of developed into, wow, we actually don't have enough space anymore for all the people that want to come and the types of events they want to do. And so that helped us start to, for the first time ever, think about this as a proper business model and think about growth. And or growth, not an expansion perspective in that we're going to start to build 100 more cabins and that type of thing, or franchise out, but growth in that how can we deepen the experience for the folks that come here? And for us, it's about it sounds weird, minimizing. It's about extracting. In the very beginning, I think we were putting like gift baskets in rooms, and I would throw everything in the kitchen sink in this little gift bag. And then I realized what people really want is a simpler story. And then we ended up running this filter of what would folks have done at a little summer vacation lodge resort like this back in 1925, 1935. And then how do we learn from that, get inspired by that, and then strip away everything else here? And so we took that really pretty literally, moving forward to the point where now we've got our manifesto is nothing crosses the threshold if it's newer than 1960. And having that filter is something we apply to everything. Whether you're walking in a kitchen and you open a kitchen drawer, you should only find a Bakelite, spatula in there. Nothing new from Target, right? Nothing that's going to be neon or pink or modern. And same thing with the sports equipment room, or when you go down to the beach, every tennis racket and boat and piece of furniture and textile in every room has to be vintage, with the exception of sort of, the lines that we make, whether it's new towels and bedding. So once we started to lean in on that, what we realized is people really respond to that, because you just don't get that a lot of places. There's a lot of folks out there that will emulate history and create this faux history if they don't have one. And then maybe they do bits of it here and there, but they're not truly telling the story of a place. And so what we've tried to do is uncover, sort of unpeel the layers of the onion of the history of this place, and at every opportunity and every touch point, tell that story. So when folks show up, everything's a surprise. When they open that drawer in the dresser in their room, they're going to find a vintage book from the 1920s about, a camp, summer camp, or a Boy Scout camp. And I think that the more that we lean in on that, the more we're able to provide a unique experience for us, that as we now are in a landscape where there's so much competition, everyone opens up boutique hotels, and we've got Airbnbs, we've got all these different sort of lodges and different folks doing them. That's the thing that consistently sets us apart. And the thing that we lean on the most is what's the most authentic way to tell our story and share our story so people feel like they're stepping into another era.
Yeah, I think that's critical. The whole thing about being really back to basics and no frills. We do find that like a lot of the people who come here are the sorts of people who travel the world, and they could stay at all the nicest hotels and go to the finest places. They're looking for something unique, something different in here. And it sounds kind of cheesy when we say it, but like kind of getting back to the simple pleasures of simple times, like getting back to a place where you don't have TVs in your room and you have shared bathrooms at the end of the hall and you don't really have any modern amenities, and hopefully you don't even get a phone signal, so people really are kind of forced to, as Tereasa said, feel like they're kind of going back in time. And I think, people can maybe relate to each other and relate to the environment and relate to nature a little bit more kind of organically when they feel like they're more disconnected.
So no Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I mean, we've got spotty Wi-Fi at best, and we kind of have a little bit of Wi-Fi just out of necessity for ourselves, like if we're here working or whatever. But we don't advertise Wi-Fi, and we don't provide Wi-Fi, and we tell people, hey, if you've got work to do, please bring your own Wi-Fi hotspot, or if you really have like some files you need to upload or download, McDonald's in nearest town of Elkhorn has free Wi-Fi. You can go there.
Yeah.
It's not that, it's not like we make people check their, cell phones in a basket when they show up, but we definitely it is back to basics. sometimes, people come here and they don't expect it. So we try to, in the early days, at least, people didn't know what to expect. So we try to kind of over-index on setting the expectations low, making sure people understand that they're not going to have maid service. It's kind of like going to camp when you show up. Like if you're at a kids camp, you got your cot and you probably got your one towel that you're issued when you show up and your one blanket or whatever, and it's just going to stay here for the duration. So it's like we don't do maid service every day. We don't turn rooms over while people are here. They're just kind of on their own the whole time. And I think there's kind of a pleasure to that that's kind of liberating, as opposed to being at a hotel where like everything is taken care of and you feel like you're being tended to.
And also, to be honest, it's somewhat disarming when you show up and then discover that you don't have locks on your door and you're in this, traditional sort of tourist lodging that they had in the 20s and 30s, predating, hotels and even motor hotels, where you have a long hallway, you've got shared bathrooms, men's and women's, you've got a shared lounge, and then everyone's got a bedroom. And so it's fun for folks. And of course, we rent to groups only. And so you're with your group when you're in the top level of the hotel, or the mid-level when it's a big group of rooms. But there isn't air conditioning. And we say, if you want air conditioning, open your window. There is some heat. We've got, hot water, but it forces you to think differently, which forces you to sort of behave differently because you have a whole different perspective. The key that we've learned is preparing people, truly like Boy Scout style. It's all about setting expectations. So we have this thing that we lean on really heavily very early on, which is called the Manifesto of Low Expectations, which is exactly like it sounds. Before anybody can book on Airbnb or anybody comes, they have this very clear outline of all the terrible things that can happen to you. And it's written in a fun way, but it's in an honest way. Yes, there are going to be, toads or maybe a snake, a garden snake in your shower. You're in an outdoor shower. There's going to be chipmunks running down the hallway. Nothing in here has been updated since the Hoover administration. Everything that you can imagine that someone could write in a Yelp review and complain about, we just own. And we're like, hey guys, this is what you're signing up for. And we are not, for most people, there's a nice little Days Inn down the road, or there's a Holiday Inn. Those are the spots for people who have any expectations at all, because we just don't want to disappoint folks at the end of the day. And so we just try to be honest, and it's worked for us so far. Having a sense of humor and a sense of humility has been a lifesaver for us, because people are very forgiving, we've found.
That's great. Well, you mentioned you've gotten a lot of press, and I think that's how we all know about you. But what have been some of your favorites that stand out as far as like photo shoots or brand collaborations or things like that?
There's been a number of things that have just been kind of surreal to us, like being on CBS Sunday Morning, or being in the Wall Street Journal, or being on MTV, like things like that it's just kind of like you're like pinching yourself going, wait a minute, is this real? Like, this is so weird, so random. Like, the fact that like we never really sought press or advertising, we've never done advertising, but I think there was something that was just kind of maybe compelling about the story of like this kind of little camp that could. And, again, I think a lot of this also had to do with the fact that the place became an inspiration for Tereasa in terms of some of, her books. For example, her 3 books are all one way or another related to camp. So, the more she started getting press and doing articles, and the article became a book, and then the book led to another book. So it's become this kind of virtuous cycle of creativity. And, it's funny too, we also talk about the fact that we bought the camp in 2004, which is the same year that Facebook started. And obviously, they're a lot more successful than we are. But I make that point just in terms of the role of social media. We had a lot of friends who were coming up who were involved in advertising, marketing, social media, people who were kind of early versions of influencers. And we didn't think of it that way. It was just what people were doing at the time. You were coming up and you were taking pictures and you were kind of microblogging about it. So, things that maybe would have just happened under the cover of darkness and the word never would have got out. Because of the early days of social media, it was able to kind of amplify our story in a way that just a couple of years before it never would have been possible.
I think to answer your question as well about what our favorite brand collaborations were, it's fun in this day and age because everyone will call a collaboration and a partnership. It could be anything. It could be like, we're going to make a singular product and do a limited edition of 5, and then they'll call it a partnership. But early on, we weren't pursuing that. But we got a phone call from Gant, which is it's this international, amazing clothing company that started as a men's clothing company, and they're based in Sweden now, but they're all over the world, and they make really beautiful high-end men's clothing, but now, of course, whole kids lines feel like a Ralph Lauren, and women's and children's. And so we did a partnership with them, and they did a collection, a Camp Wandawega collection, and there were probably maybe 25 pieces in it, and it was for kids, but they did backpacks and handkerchiefs and shirts and pants and shorts and jackets and jumpsuits and all these great fun things. And we influenced design by giving them all of our identity system and style guide, but then they really took the ball and ran with it. And they did some of the most beautiful products that we've seen. And then right before it launched, they ceased selling the children's line in the U.S. And so David and I had to fly to London for the launch. And it was this incredible flagship, and it was this beautiful floor, and walking into that room and seeing all of the products in one place with the Camp Wandawega name on it kind of blew our minds, because we just never planned for that. And it was fun, and it was a singular season. That was really fun, I think, that stands out. And then another one that we really it's still close to our hearts. Crate and Barrel had a line called, or a brand, a sub-brand actually called Land of Nod. And it was kids started out as bedding, but then it went into kids' toys and home furnishing and goods and everything. And we did a huge line with them a few years ago, about 45 pieces. And it crossed every category from play structures. So they came out and they really just documented all of camp. So they ended up making miniature kids versions of our teepees, our tents, sleeping bags, everything down to ornaments. Oh my Lord, the treehouse. So it was intended to be a limited edition for a season. And they did like dress up outfits, everything. They even made a stuffed version of our dog, Frankie. It was incredible. And bedding, it was nuts. It just goes on, and it was mind blowing. But what happened was it did so well that the next year, instead of it only being seasonal, they actually kept selling it. People kept buying it. So there was a stuffed canoe that they still sell. And it looks like a big dog bed, but it's a kid's bed. And it's just something that doesn't go out of style, because I think that they hit a nerve with, I think, the theme of camp in general, and it transcends Camp Wandawega, but it's about being timely and timeless. The designs that they were creating at the time weren't based on a trend and a color palette that was going to be millennial pink, that was going to go out of style the next year. What they were creating was something that had enough history and provenance that they were staying authentic to what the camp was, putting a kid's spin on it. And so, we're doing this call with you now up in our bunk room, which is, imagine like 3 bears. It's just rows of bunks. And I'm looking at the pillows and the blankets in here. They all say Camp Wandawega 1925, and they're from the Land of Nod line. So here it is years later, and we still, by some grace of God, get these, residual checks, because they're still selling the treehouse, which is a miniature version of our treehouse, which is a dollhouse, is epic, and several other things. And so none of us really expected it to stick, I guess, and we're grateful that it has. That one stands out. And of course, we've done a bunch since. David, I'm sure that you love the Ural motorcycle. That was a fun one too, and complete polar opposite of the kids lines. But it just goes on. And I think that those are some of our favorites, because we still every once in a while see folks that will post a photo of their kids with either wearing the raccoon shirt from the Gant line, or, with the treehouse or some toy from the Land of Nod line. So that's been really fun for us.
That's great. I feel like you guys have your hands in a lot of different things, and I love that. So, Tereasa, as David mentioned, you have had the opportunity to write and publish some books. Tell us a little bit more about those.
Well, the first one is called A Very Modest Cottage, and it was about moving this tiny little 1920s motor cabin court building. Is almost like a modern day she shed, you'd say, but it was a little log cabin from my hometown up here to camp. And it was in my hometown, and I always just liked it when I was a kid. It was sitting, next to my grandma's house, and it always seemed sad because it was abandoned even back then. So I just started talking to my little brother. I said, "Can we just move that up to camp and fix it?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, we can do anything." So he did. I was in Prague on a film shoot, and in the middle of night, 3:00 in the morning there, I got a phone call from the editor-in-chief of Country Living magazine. She said, "I hope you don't mind, My name is Nancy Sariano. I hope you don't mind, but I made a phone call and I met with the head of Hearst Publishing, who was the publisher of Country Living at the time. And we would like to take your story about this little cabin that you moved 350 miles in a flatbed truck and fixed up and turn it into a book. And I was like, I'm so confused. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. It's really only 10 by 10 square feet. So that's the whole story. Is there enough story in that for you? And I said, I'm not a writer. So who's going to write this? She's like, well, you are. And then I just went into full panic mode because I could not fathom that someone would want to write a story about a project so small. It was big to us, but in our minds at the time, people only wrote books or got publishers calling them for big things, right? And so that was a turning point because I think at that moment I realized if you're emotionally attached to something and you're really passionate about something and you just put everything into it and you tell that story and you share that story, what you're doing is you're inspiring other people who maybe have never considered doing that to do it themselves. And we did that, Lord David, what was it, about almost 13 years ago, wasn't it? Probably. And this is before this wave of tiny homes happened. And so we just wanted to save it. And it was a fun little project, but I think serendipitously, we were just hitting the right sort of project at the right time. So that book came out and it was really fun. It was an amazing journey. And it was just almost like a little diary of this little project. And that ended up, as soon as it got published, there was another book that was called Found, Free, and Flee, and that was the story about resurrecting Camp Wandawega, one room at a time, by way of every yard sale, barn sale, thrift store, garage sale in the county and beyond. And then all of the different collections that we found here in the story of resurrecting different components in different spots and different things that we learned. So it was a little bit of a DIY meets thrift store meets flea market. And then that one was Clarkson Potter, which is a division of Random House. And then that one just hit. And then Anthropology picked that one up. And then it went to its second printing. And it was so much fun and so much work at the same time, but we loved it. And what was really happening is that we were just documenting the before and afters of everything we were doing. I wasn't really writing a book as we were in the process of resurrecting camp. I was just documenting it. And then to find out that someone wants to turn it into a book was really rewarding because it sort of validated something that was just, done on the cheap. We didn't have any money to do these things. We were just doing the best we could with what we had. And so it still is inspiring to think that there's an audience out there that maybe don't have the means to go out and build some, big, large, modern cabin, and they do what they can with what they have. And it ends up being even more rewarding because you're really invested in that in a different way. And that inspired me to do the third book, which it just came out. And that one I actually partnered with my writing partner at our agency, Ogilvy, Donna. She'd been my writing partner for so many years, and she has a beautiful voice. She's a proper writer. I like to say I can write, emails, and it's very colloquial, very conversational. If you read my emails or my blog posts, you'll see that every third word spelled wrong. Donna's a really beautiful writer. So I asked her, I had the story idea, but I didn't have the voice for what I envisioned. And so she and I wrote this one together, and it's called The Forever Tree. And it's about the tree house that sits in the very center of camp that was built in this, this epic, we called it the grandfather tree. It was the biggest tree on the property. And it died quite suddenly, which was devastating because we're real tree huggers here. It was so beautiful. And it had been here for over a century, and it got Dutch elm disease and died. And so not long after, actually, my father had died. So I had a strange sentimental attachment to this tree because he had christened this property when we bought it by hanging a tree swing in that tree. And so I could not bring myself to cut the tree swing down because he hung it. It was just like this, attachment that I couldn't get past. So my brother came out, who's an arborist and a treeman, and he said, Teresa, you're going to have to cut this tree down. It's dead. It's dangerous. You have too many kids here. And it was gigantic. It was going to start dropping limbs. And so I knew he was right. But what he ended up doing is limbing it. I don't know what the word is. Do you know, David, when you just topped it off? He cut all of the high, big canopy off, so it wasn't a danger anymore. And then it was this weird half tree, truncate trunk in the middle of the property that I couldn't cut it down, because what Sam had done, my brother, is he left Dad's tree swing up. He left that limb up that was hanging Dad's swing. And so at this point, it had been a few years, but I was still too attached to it. So then we started doing all these different philanthropic free camps just for the community and our extended friends. One of them was Art Camp. And Art Camp is just a collection of artists and makers and builders and amazing humans, generous, creative humans. And we always do a creative project every year. And so they said, we want to build a treehouse this year. We've got 25 acres of trees. Let's pick one. So the artists and the builders are touring the property and trying to pick a tree. And of course, we have so many. And they picked all the big ones, the sturdy ones, the gigantic ones, the healthy ones. And I said, this is going to sound crazy, but can I just show you this one? And then I told them the story. It was Dad's tree. And they said, that's it. This is the tree. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to build this tree house in a dead tree, at half of a dead tree. And so they did. And what happened was like beyond anything we could have imagined. They came out and spent a year and a half in groups of volunteers on their weekends building this epic tree house, which looks like a house in a tree, but it's actually built structurally in these telephone poles that are in the ground and, rebar and concrete. So the weight isn't on the trunk of the tree. But they built this as a memorial for my dad, but it ended up being this really beautiful story about seeing the beauty in things that look like they're too far gone, and seeing the promise and the hope of something else rather than seeing something dead or something that feels like it's outlived its use. And that turned into The Forever Tree, which is the children's book, which we just found out last week has been picked up by Scholastics, and that's going to be in every school. And we're excited about that. We just found out a few months ago that it's getting published in France. So we never could have imagined that these tiny little projects could, live on beyond what they are here physically at camp.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's amazing. David, you serve on the board of the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. How has your experience with restoring Camp Wandawega sort of influenced your role there?
Yeah, I think I've always been in, like Tereasa, both of us have always been into saving old things, whether it's buildings or motorcycles or cars or houses or whatever. Like we always were into vintage and thrift and like finding things that just needed, to be saved. And I think Tereasa and I are both kind of maybe frustrated architects. I think neither of us was ever very good at math. So I think, when I was younger, I thought about being an architect, but I found out that I would have to take too much math. So I became a graphic designer instead. So I think my love of saving old things and my love of architecture led me to, doing a lot of, renovation and preservation stuff in general, on my own and in Chicago with, a partner of mine, buying 2 flats and 3 flats and fixing them up, things along those lines. And then ultimately my love of, preservation, kind of through twists and turns, obviously brought me to Camp Wandawega. This has been like an amazing, never-ending preservation project. But then I also was able, and I'm honored to be on the board of the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust too, where I think, for me, it's like, how can I help them through the things that I'm good at, whether it's marketing or creativity, things along those lines, to come up with ideas about how we can kind of breathe new life into what's already an amazing organization of the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, but trying to find ways to make the organization more relevant to a new generation or younger generation of architecture aficionados.
That's great. Well, guys, what's next for you and for Camp Wandawega?
Yeah, there's always something brewing. I think Tereasa and I spent the last couple of years kind of thinking about, like, do we want to, fix up some things that need more fixing up, or do we want to buy some more adjacent property or nearby property? And I think what we ended up doing is working with the good folks at the local township and the county here, and we consolidated all of our acres into a single parcel, because they used to be multiple parcels. And we worked with them to get permission to be able to add a couple of rustic campsites and camping units in the woods. We had a lot of kind of back acres, which, people would walk through once in a while, and there's kind of hiking trails, but they were basically underutilized. So now we are going through the process of kind of sketching and designing kind of these cute little, rustic, like A-frame style cabins that'll have no running water, no electricity. It'll just be these really little primitive cabins that are in the back of the woods, so that we can kind of give people more places to kind of escape to, and to kind of, even when you're here at camp, when you're down here kind of in the thick of things, down by the campfire, down by the beach, or down by the sports courts and things like that, I think it's going to be nice for some people who can kind of go up and sleep in a little rustic camping cluster in the middle of the woods. So we're just trying to figure out how to make that happen now. We've got the all the things sorted out with the township and the county and the state. And now we're just kind of going through some, things with the architectural drawings and the permits and things like that.
That's exciting. Well, how do we follow along and keep up with everything you guys have going on?
Instagram. I'm sure that you hear that a lot. It's funny, in the beginning we did, Twitter and Pinterest and the blog, and updated the website a lot, and Facebook obviously. But you know what? It's really, at the end of the day, it's just Instagram. That's where our audience is, and that's really how we sort of share what we're doing day to day. Although in the off season, we get down to, I probably post once a week. And what we do in high season is that I spend a lot of time just sharing out the stories of other folks that come here and their events and their getaways, because I think that's been the amazing discovery here, is that we don't need to make content. People that come here make the content, and we just share it. And that's why on our Instagram it says that we're a little getaway in Wisconsin, and it's the feed is created by those who we share this place with.
That's great. And if people want to come stay, where do they go for that information?
I mean, the best place is just to go to Wandawega.com, and you can get kind of overall information. It's primarily set up for like larger groups doing like creative retreats and things along those lines. But when we have unused inventory, we also allow small groups, like a group of friends or family, to kind of come and do like their own little self-planned, self-guided camp getaway. And so they can do that via Airbnb.
Perfect. And they can help support all your efforts. So
yeah, exactly.
Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been a great conversation. I love what you're doing, have followed you for years. So thanks again for being on here.
Thanks for having us. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I love that David and Tereasa followed their passion, and while they didn't even have plans of operating the camp as a business, their passion was contagious and it overflowed into all of these amazing opportunities. And I love how their creativity just keeps fueling more creativity. From the camp itself to their books and their brand collaborations, it's pretty amazing to watch. So if you're in need of a little creative inspiration, go check out their Instagram, and you can find the links to everything we talked about in the show notes. Also, we just launched the Live Rural Survey, and we're asking everyone to take a minute to complete this. No matter where you live, rural, urban, or somewhere in between, your input matters and will help us gather important insights. Go to ruralrevival.co/Live Rural Survey, and I promise it will only take a minute. Also, could you please share the Live Rural Survey link on your social pages to help us get this in front of as many people as possible? Thank you so much, and thanks for tuning in today. And a huge thanks to David and Tereasa for being on the podcast. Have a great day, everybody.